Hello, my friends. D.L. Anderson here. Welcome back to Transformation by Truth podcast as we share the truth concerning these last days and what you must do to save yourself from the violent times that are just ahead. Today's podcast is a word of truth accounting of the end times. The end is coming. The end is near. Today's podcast is entitled Greater Works You Shall Do, Part 8. Why the majority in this nation will never escape the curse of this captivity. The podcast objectives are analyze how peace and godliness turn back our captivity, analyze the fate of a physical nation, reveal what it will take for our world to witness the rule of Elohim, and reveal why the majority will never see the rule of Elohim. Welcome. Now, before we begin today's lesson, I would like to welcome all my beloved brothers and sisters in Yahushua Messiah who have been scattered to the four corners of the earth, who Yahuwah has joined to this ministry for such a time as this. I would also like to welcome anyone who is engaging our podcast or videos for the first time. We trust you were led by the set apart spirit in finding us. And if you continue to be led, we hope you stay with us. For these are troubling times, and an evil day is just ahead. To this end, if you are watching this video on YouTube and you have not subscribed to our channel, click the subscribe button below, and you will be alerted whenever we post new videos. Also, if you have any questions at the conclusion of this video, you can ask them using the link in the podcast description below the video player. Last but not least, if you like the video, please give it a thumbs up so YouTube can share it with believers like us. Adjacent to the levels of peace and godliness. Shalom, my beloved brothers and sisters, and welcome back to our Word from a Watchman series. In the most recent podcast, we continued our analysis of the most critical model for greater works. Enter the procedural model. In doing so, we checked 4 more boxes in addition to the 4 boxes we checked 2 weeks ago. Ergo, we have now checked 8 boxes. To wit, we have covered 8 standards that are required for us to do greater works. And those standards are faith, obedience, virtue, the fear of Elohim, knowledge, wisdom, power, and authority. Together, these 8 standards open the door for you to experience the Torah of life. Praise Yah. Now, there are many more boxes you must check, and most of them will be checked as we continue in our quest. Ergo, and seeing as this podcast will be the last in our series on greater works, I would like to focus on the most critical box we have checked thus far. That would be authority, which makes sense, for our levels of authority are contingent to our levels of wisdom, which are contingent to our levels of knowledge, which is the most critical degree of power. And thus, the following is true. Authority is the pinnacle of power. Ergo, the man who operates in the authority of Elohim has access to the greatest source of power in heaven and earth. And this is why he will be empowered to do greater works. Again, praise Yah. Now, as it pertains to these last days, one of the greatest works we have witnessed and are witnessing is the turning back of our captivity. As I say, this is the greatest work in this current season. Here is why. If Yahuwah does not turn back your captivity in this season, you will not survive the ensuing seasons in these last days. We know this because the seal of Elohim is required for us to survive in these last days. And Yahuwah will not cover you with his seal if he has no intention of turning back your captivity. That would be insane. Not only this, but this muddled thinking is contrary to the atonement process. You can see this by the image to the right. Look here. The covering, which includes the seal of Elohim, is unlocked near the top of the pinnacle of holiness, adjacent to the levels of peace and godliness. Now, this makes perfect sense, for when you ascend to the level of peace, you enter the secret place of the Most High, where you are covered by the shadow of the Almighty Elohim, Hallelujah. And we analyze this matter in a detailed account of the Torah of Yahushua Messiah, Part 7, which was posted on January 30th, 2026. Now, if you have the time, I encourage you to go back into the archives and listen to that podcast. Trust me, you will be blessed by the word that was shared, and you will better understand the role that peace plays in our ability to be covered in these last days. Now, that's the word on peace. Let's talk about godliness, beginning with the following treasure box. The fundamental degree of godliness is restoration. Here lies the inflection, for the overarching purpose of these last days is restoration, and we can only be restored to Elohim by ascending to the level of godliness. That is, the spiritual plane where we take on the divine nature of our Creator. Now, this is why godliness is adjacent to the covering. To wit, once we are restored to Elohim, we can be covered by Elohim. Until then, we must appreciate our reality. To wit, restoration is a process which begins with purging, which leads to power, which leads to authority, which leads to pardoning, which leads to covering, which leads to dominion, which is the key to inheriting the renewed heavens and the renewed earth. All praises to the Most High Elohim. Now, here again, you can see this by the image to the right. Feel free to pause the video. Now, these things being what they surely are, it is clear that the curse of this captivity will not be lifted at a national level. And we touched on this matter at the end of the most recent podcast. However, we did not have enough time to seal the deal on this matter. And since this is the final podcast in this series, today we must seal the deal on this matter. And so let's get started. The downfall of a physical nation. Now, first things first, there are many red flags with the faulty premise that Yahuwah is turning back our captivity at a national level. And we covered several of these in the most recent podcast. Ergo, if you have not listened to the podcast from last Friday, please be sure to find the time. Now, one red flag that we did not cover is sure, vis-a-vis, this false doctrine is based upon the false reality that Yahuwah is reestablishing a physical nation. And this is why it is only being embraced by false Hebrews. Consider this, my friends, and be advised. A physical nation, i.e., a nation that is united by physical origins and nature, as opposed to spiritual, will always devolve into carnality. We know this because this is the evolution of physics and spirit. To wit, the spirit offers life, while the nature of physics is fated to death. Not only this, but the de-evolution of physics is why Yahuwah destroyed the world with a flood. Not only this, but it is also why he destroyed the former nation. It is because the physics of a man are suffering under a curse that can be traced back to the original transgression in the earth. And because of this transgression, our physical nature is currently under a complex curse. And as this curse fell upon all men because of transgression, the de-evolution of this curse has ensnared many men. And now many men are committing many transgressions. Now, that said, the question we should chiefly entertain is this: why would the Most High Elohim turn back the captivity of a physical nation that is cursed by carnality and fated to transgress his command, when the purpose of the restoration is to cover a remnant who have spiritually fashioned themselves to guard his commands? Now, the short answer is he wouldn't. And yet, our nation is being destroyed by false Hebrews who believe he will. My dear friends, hear me carefully as I say, these spiritual degenerates are so delusional that they believe Yahuwah is restoring a physical nation when we have already seen how that story ends. Look here. We already know the tale of this tragedy. To wit, the failure of the former nation is the only reason why we are here. Let me tell you something. If a physical nation had the power to guard the command, we would be serving Elohim in our own land. But guess what? We are not serving Elohim in our own land because a physical nation over time will always, I repeat, always devolve into carnality, and they will become the scum of the earth. For every nation that evolves into carnality will inherit many sorrows and be under a curse. To initiate the rule of Elohim in the earth. Now, these things being what they surely are, the question of the hour is quite simply this: what is driving the insanity of the majority in this nation to believe that Yahuwah is restoring a physical nation and turning back the captivity of spiritual deviance and transgressors who are contrary to the rule of Elohim in their lives. Now, before we answer this question, you must consider the following treasure box. The restoration of the nation of Israel is to initiate the rule of Elohim in the earth. For look, listen, it has been written, and you shall say to Pharaoh, thus said Yahuwah, Israel is my son, my firstborn. So I say to you, let my son go to serve me. Look again, my friends, and listen. Listen. Thus said Yahuwah of hosts, the children of Israel were oppressed along with the children of Yehuda, and all who took them captive have held them fast. They refused to let them go. Their Redeemer is strong. Yahuwah of hosts is his name. He shall strongly plead their case so as to give rest to the land, but unrest to the inhabitants of Babel. Now, these verses and many others speak to our nation's past and our nation's future. To wit, Yahuwah is at this time releasing the renewed nation of Israel from the curse of this captivity so that we can serve him as we usher in the rule of Elohim. This is crucial, for the rule of Elohim will not come if the righteous seed are not free. And yet, the righteous seed, i.e., the seed of promise, cannot be free if we do not unlock the power to do greater works. For it will take greater works to turn back our captivity. Now, we will talk about the rule of Elohim in the next series in our Word from a Watchman series. But before we make this transition, the Ruach is leading me to reveal why the majority within this nation will never see the rule of Elohim on the earth. And as you can likely imagine, it has to do with the fact that they have not unlocked the power to do greater works. Let's talk about it. The fine print that no one reads. Now, first of all, you should know that there are many reasons why false Hebrews are under the delusion that Yahuwah is restoring a physical nation. Besides the fact that these bad actors are filled with prejudice, it is for the following reason. False Hebrews in this day are no different than the former nation that Yahuwah destroyed in that day. To wit, they are habitual transgressors who are addicted to sin and lawlessness. We know this because these false fools are under the insane impression that our captivity gives us license to sin. Look here. The men and women within the dying nation of Israel are justifying their sin and lawlessness because they are under a curse. What fools! Sin and lawlessness are the reason why they are under a curse. And yet, these spiritual deviants believe they can continue in sin and lawlessness and expect Yahuwah to turn back their captivity, and they should inherit the earth. Tis madness, tis insanity, tis foolishness, tis folly. Let me tell you something. The thing that got you into trouble can never get you out of trouble. And this is especially the case when it comes to spiritual matters and our failure to guard the command of Elohim. My dear friends, Hear me carefully as I say, there are no circumstances where we, as children of the Most High, Elohim, are given license, i.e., an excuse to transgress the Torah. Trust me, it's a non starter. Here lies the inflection. To wit, these false Hebrews are not children of the Most High Elohim. As I say, they are the synagogue of Satan. We know this because they are approving his will. They are doing his works. And this is why they are promoting the delusion of a physical nation. It's because it's the only nation they are qualified to be a part of. And Satan is the only father they have ever known. Now, this reality tells a tale as to why these false Hebrews will never do greater works. Remember, we began this podcast revealing that authority is the pinnacle of power and the most critical key to establishing dominion in the earth. Here lies the inflection and the problem. To wit, the false Hebrews within the dying nation of Israel have no authority. And this is why they have devolved into the synagogue of Satan. Now, let me tell you something. There is a rule about spiritual warfare that every transgressor is unaware of. To wit, the fine print that no one reads until the money has been spent. Get this, you will be forced to join every enemy you fight in spiritual battle if you cannot defeat that enemy in spiritual battle. As I say, if you can't beat them, then you will be forced to join them. For to the victor belongs the spoils, and you, my friend, are the spoils. My dear friends, this is why I have constantly warned you about the high stakes involved in spiritual warfare. Listen to me. The stakes could not be any higher. For when the enemy takes you captive, the first thing he will do is push you into the progression of death. And as you have learned, there is a point of no return in this progression. To wit, a point where you have walked in darkness for so long that you will incur spiritual blindness beyond recovery. And this, my friends, is why the majority within our nation will never escape the curse of this captivity. It is because they have no authority to defeat the spiritual forces that are driving this captivity. And thus, they will die under the curse of this captivity. This is the fate of every transgressor in Israel who continues in sin and lawlessness. Set your heart on these matters, take counsel, and speak your mind. Now, here is the final word. The enemy came and captured the majority because they found they had no authority. Brothers and sisters, hear me carefully as I say, it is indeed a tragedy that history is repeating itself and in the worst way. But whilst we find our nation is going through the worst of times, we, my friends, are going through the best of times. My dear friends, Yahuwah is telling the powers of darkness that are fueling this captivity to let his people go so we can serve him in our own land. But first, we must unlock the power to do greater works. And this can only be done by guarding his command. Heretofore, I recommend when you see the false Hebrews justifying their sin and excusing their lawlessness because they are cursed. Remember, they will not see the best of times. Alas, the only times they will see will be to their hurt. Selah. Now, here is today's assignment. Meditate on today's lesson. And if you have any questions, please submit them using the form at pinnacleofholiness.com. And I will respond to you as soon as I can. Now, here is what's next. We completed today's podcast, Greater Works You Shall Do, Part 8. And the next podcast is entitled End Times 654, an Intro to Wisdom, Part 4. I will post this podcast on Monday, May 25th, 2026. Until then, my friends, continue to be led by the Spirit of Elohim, continue to watch, continue to pray, continue in fasting, and most of all, continue to be focused, for the end is coming. The end is near.